At any moment, right now, there is a list. Not a public one, not a democratic one, a private list that decides who gets cheap money, who gets expensive money, and who gets no money at all. You've never seen this list, but it quietly shapes who builds empires and who spends a lifetime paying interest to them. This is the hidden chain that turns debt into power. Here's the uncomfortable starting point. In modern economies, money is not created when you work. It is created when someone goes into debt. Every mortgage, every business loan, every government bond, new money enters the system as a liability first, which means the people who control debt creation control the birth of money itself. And that is where power begins. Why does this matter right now? Because global debt is higher than at any point in human history. Household debt, corporate debt, government debt, trillions upon trillions. But more important than how much debt exists is who gets access to it first. Because debt is not neutral, it is a lever. And levers move entire societies. Let's start with a simple scene. Two people walk into two different banks. Same age, same education, same business idea. One walks out with a low-interest loan. The other walks out with nothing. No scandal, no conspiracy, just a credit decision. But that single decision will compound for decades. One person builds assets using borrowed money. The other pays rent to someone who did. And the gap widens quietly, year after year. This is not a story about greed. It's a story about structure. Here is the chain. Step 1. Central banks set the price of money. Not for you, for banks. They decide the base interest rate. That rate determines how cheaply financial institutions can borrow. Step 2. Commercial banks create most of the money. Not governments, not treasuries. Banks. When a bank approves a loan, it does not move existing money. It creates new money on a screen. A deposit appears, a debt appears. Money is born. Step 3. Banks do not lend evenly. They lend based on collateral, history, and existing wealth, which means those who already own assets get cheaper money. Those who don't get expensive money, or no money. This is the first asymmetry. Now comes the part that turns debt into power. Most new credit does not go into building new businesses. It goes into buying existing assets, homes, stocks, commercial real estate, which means debt inflates asset prices first. Not wages, not productivity, assets. And who owns most assets? The people who already had access to cheap debt. This is the second asymmetry. Now let's make this concrete. When interest rates fall, borrowing becomes cheaper. Investors borrow to buy houses. Prices rise. Existing homeowners get richer on paper. Banks become more willing to lend against those higher prices, which creates more borrowing, which pushes prices higher. A feedback loop. Debt inflates wealth. Wealth unlocks more debt. Debt inflates more wealth. This is how leverage becomes dominance. Now look at the irony. Public story, hard work builds wealth. Private mechanism, access to balance sheets builds wealth faster. The system does not reward effort first. It rewards position. And here's the uncomfortable math. If you can borrow at 4% to buy an asset that rises at 8%, you get rich by standing still. If you borrow at 12% to survive, you get poorer by working. Same system, opposite outcomes. Now zoom out. This does not just shape individuals, it shapes nations. Countries with strong currencies borrow cheaply. They accumulate assets globally. Countries with weak currencies borrow expensively. They export labor and import interest. Debt becomes a geopolitical tool, not through invasion, through balance sheets. And the incentives lock in. Banks prefer lending to asset owners. Governments prefer rising asset prices. Pension funds depend on asset inflation. Politicians celebrate growth driven by credit. Very few people benefit from slowing the machine, even when it becomes dangerous. Because here is the final twist. Debt does not just create power. It concentrates risk. The more leverage in the system, the more fragile it becomes. Small shocks become crises. Liquidity disappears. Credit freezes. And the same people who received cheap money in booms receive rescue money in busts. Losses are socialized. Gains remain private. The chain closes. So when you hear about a housing boom, or a stock rally, or a new wave of easy credit, the real question is not how fast is the economy growing. The real question is who is allowed to borrow at the bottom of the interest rate ladder, because that is where the future is being written, quietly, on a balance sheet, by a decision you'll never see. And that leaves one final question. In a world where money is born as debt, is inequality a failure of the system, or the system working exactly as designed?